but actually focusing on bringing more business with other countries. So with Canada having access, it makes it easier for me to sell in the US, and also makes it easier for me to sell in Mexico. And then with other treaties that Canada has, it makes it easier for me to from Canada is start negotiations with other countries and other markets.
Okay, Ingrid, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good yourself?
Great. We had some technical difficulties getting set up here, and but great to have you on. Uh, Ingrid, your bio really stood out to me because one, I think you're an international entrepreneur, right? Currently, you're coming out of the Accelerator Center, your startup, right? But also, you said you're an avid runner, and I want to jump into this a little bit. You said in the bio that you're an ultra runner.
Yes.
What does that mean?
It's a good mix of things. So ultra runners, basically, we do races that are more than a marathon. So a marathon is 42K. I say I'm a baby ultra runner because I do 50Ks and 80Ks. It seems a lot to most people, but when you compare to other ultra runners, they're doing 200Ks over there. It's just the start of it. So yeah.
Perfect. So, I've heard of ultra running because, through podcasts, Joe Rogan talks about these all the time.
Yeah.
The idea kind of sounds kind of insane. Like, people already go through these hard tasks of triathlons and marathons, right? So, what brought you to like ultra running?
The idea is insane. It's funny that people have a perspective that they say like, oh, you run that much, you must be so healthy. And the studies show that for a matter of fact, when you run that much, you're even less healthy, right? Because you're surpassed the part what is healthy. I think the thing that brought me to ultra running is perspective and introversion. So like it's a moment that I get, first of all, dedicate myself to a thing that is not work, that is not studies and anything like that, that is only physical and allows my head to process everything I'm going through. And when
Mm.
you do, I do trail ultra running, you have a lot of ups and downs, just like in life, but way more intense. So usually sleep deprived and you're going up a mountain or like it's 33 degrees out there. It's a very, you have to deal with a lot of problems during ultra running, but it's very rewarding in the end. So it's a different kind of suffering. It's a good kind of suffering.
I have this theory that entrepreneurs are these people who are obsessed with suffering, and they're just finding different things to suffer from. Because, really, what you truly are is addicted to solving large problems. And why this stuck out really to me is, what is a intense problem rather than ultra running, right? Defeating this huge task that's in front of you. What I love mostly about ultra running is like they talk so much about their mind, the mind state, right? The biggest war you fight is up here. And what I love about, such an extreme task as that is that it helps you. The idea is to build up your mind, and then once you have that mentality, you can focus that shift towards other activities, right? So
Yeah.
that's why I want to
I
open
always
with.
say, I always say that I do my best thinking and do my great and make my greatest decisions when I'm on my long runs on Sundays. And that's
Mhm.
usually when I think problems through and I have a decision by the end of it because of the time that I have to process everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, that's awesome, and it's a pretty a healthy obsession, right? To
Hmm.
to focus your ideas onto that. Cool. So I want to start off with that because the idea of solving hard problems. Let's jump into your startup. What are you currently working on?
So my startup is SafetyDocs Global. We are mostly a spin-off, not as much of a startup in the sense that like we've been in the market for 5 years back in Brazil. We started the company and the endeavor here in Canada for globalization last year in November, participating in one of the accelerator programs, LATAM startups, and then entering the accelerator center after that. And what basically we do, we are a software service company that offer solutions for document management, especially for permits and legal documents, where they can have reports, task management, upload of documents, sending documents all over. So it's basically a very specific software to help with the expiration date so they don't lose that or get fined by it.
Amazing. And again, you started this company in Brazil, right? And you brought it over to North America, like you migrated the company over here.
Yes, so we're still operating in Brazil, but we're doing a spin-off in Canada. That's the first step for our globalization. Yeah.
Yeah, I love this trend. We're seeing more of these, especially these Latinx startups coming to Canada, establishing and having a global presence through that. It seems to be it's a particular challenge because you're operating across two different, regions, crossing, crossing those bounds. Running a startup is already kind of difficult. Can you talk about, kind of the nuances of running a startup that's kind of international, jumping into Canada and the environment? How's it different?
Of course, I think there's a couple of things. First thing is that I have a master's, and I'm currently pursuing a master's in intercultural communication, so that helps a lot in that sense and explaining that difference.
Gotcha.
But I think there's a big difference between how we work in Latin America and how we work in North America, and how to bridge those gaps in order to be more effective in negotiation. I'm a huge proponent to watching people talk and how they speak, which words they use, and then implement that in my own communication, right? I think the biggest challenge it would be, not just talking from my experience, but with people that I know, is creating those connections in a new country. So like we've been working for 5 years in Brazil. I have connections. There's people that know me, public speaking and all that. When you come to a new country, no one knows who you are. No one knows what you do. And you have to build all this networking all over again. So that's like the biggest challenge regarding that, as well as finding good mentors that I do have in Latin America, but don't necessarily apply to Canada. Within that, you have all the intrinsicies of legal, accounting, and all of that that you have to manage between two countries. And by being a small company, it's very hard because you don't have like 3 or 5 people on your legal team that can like just study that and decide. So you have to choose the right people to help you with both countries, or how to like transfer money and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So it's like a culture. I would say there's a cultural aspect plus like the just intrinsicies of dealing with all the aspects of the business by being like a very small team.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, did you come here particularly for your master's, or was the master's like a tool for your startup? The academic portion of it, like how did that tie into your decision to come to Canada?
So and I know this is a little bit overused, but I'm a life learner, and
Hmm.
I've done my I done a first bachelor's, and then I did a diploma, and now I'm doing my master's, and I want to pursue my doctorate. It is, and it's not intrinsic with my business in the sense that there's a lot of things that I can apply to my business, and I'm gonna do that my doctorate related to my business, but at the same time, they're two different things, right? So when I moved to Canada, I first of all didn't move with the first intention to globalize through Canada. I moved here for my second bachelor's, for my diploma. And then I started my master's here. And then we saw the opportunity to bring the company from Brazil. I was already studying it and seeing if Canada would be the best one, or we should start with the other countries in Latin America first, or Europe, or something like that. And then when I found the opportunity, I jumped at it, and then we started doing the process. So it was first of all me moving, and then like managing the company from abroad, and then bringing the company with me.
Hmm. That's really cool. So going back down to loving to solve hard problems, right? Education is a great problem to solve. I once heard like the real value of a degree is not the grade even the name say behind it. It's a certificate saying that you can accomplish this hard task, right?
Hmm.
And depending on the degree, depending on the school, depending on all that, it's a measure of how hard it is, and that's what society respects you for. And that kind of gave me a different perspective to this, right? So I love looking at entrepreneurship with a lens of solving problems and the market rewarding you for solving problems, right? I think we idolize a lot of entrepreneurs because they make this all the cash, the tech entrepreneurs. We see these titans up there, but truly is that they've solved problems, right? They solve the larger the problem they solve, the more they get rewarded about. So let's talk about the size of the problem you're solving. What attracted you to it, and can you define it for us?
Of course. So basically, what attracted to me at first, my co-founder, she has been working in this industry with permits in Brazil for more than 25 years, right?
Mm.
And what business usually, so when we're talking about permits, just so you have a broad idea, we're talking about business licenses, all kinds of licenses. So like fire license, you have the licenses for mining or licenses for construction. You have a lot of different licenses that you have to take from the government, and then you have to control. And she has a consulting business for that. On the other hand, she didn't find the tools that she needed to control those licenses, as her consulting business is basically helping clients do that. So we thought about creating the software. I was like, well, why don't we create a software for that? Mind you, I'm not a computer engineer, neither is she. So we got a third party. So like, hey, construct this for us. Like, this is the screens. Like at the time, we knew little about tech. And it was basically like, okay, these are the screens. I need that done. And we kind of went from it. And it got a very good adherence, especially with the clients that she already had in her consulting business, and therefore it blew up to other to other companies and other fields. So it was basically like finding that there was no solutions for that, and then developing the MVP and then the idea forward. Like if you were to compare the software that we had 5 years ago to the software that we had now, it's like black and white. But it was the first project. It was like, hey, how can we help those people, and how can we use this problem to our advantage, and help the market with that.
Hmm. Interesting. So, going to that, right? So, the chief problem was it started in Brazil. Like, what did you see around you that like brought you into that? Was it something that you've been thinking about for a while? How was the jump made?
So the jump was made basically when we realized that those companies were having a hard time controlling their expiration dates and the tasks that they had. Especially because it's not like it's no one's core business besides a consulting firm that will help companies with that. So they're not very looked at with like big eyes, in the sense of like, okay, I'm gonna help this part of the company solve this issue, but rather they are only solved upon when there's a fine from a document that they didn't get compliant because they were busy with other stuff. So talking to those professionals was what make us make the leap. It was kind of like, okay, would you use a platform like that? And they were like, yeah. So like, okay, let's try and see. Basically, let's try to create the platform and see if people buy it. And then it ended up going pretty well.
Awesome. I mean, those are kind of the best kind of case scenarios, right? Like we hear these stories of you just kind of build it and people just come and it's like a wonderful surprise for everybody, and you kind of just build on top of that. So let's talk about next steps. Like, what does it look like now? Like, where is it? Where have you come? Where'd you start?
Yeah.
How, like,
So our next steps, so basically we start growing exponentially in Brazil, getting into multiple industries and kind of getting our clientele growing there. And then now in Canada, our next steps are doing our networking and starting to get our first customers. We were doing some tweaks on the platform to start some pilot projects with some prospects that we have, and then starting from there. So we're starting our commercialization right now in Canada.
any main changes you see the difference in doing business here versus in Brazil?
Um, there is. I feel like like when we talk about startups and we would talk about like even spin-offs, I think the people here are way more open to hearing your ideas and to help you, in the
Okay.
sense of like being one of the reasons that we did choose Canada to start our globalization is because there's a strong support to female entrepreneurs as well. I'm a female, my co-founder is also female. So like in the sense that I don't, there's a lot of, I think it's a cultural thing, but in the Brazilian environment, I felt a little bit more restricted by that. First of all, because I'm a young entrepreneur. Second of all, because I'm a woman in tech. So there was a lot of glass ceilings that I don't really see here. Not that they don't exist, but they are less apparent here in Canada, and they like the networking and the community helps a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So talking about that, like coming to this environment and having to how to deal with changes. What's the support system look like to you? Right, LatAm is a great group. I've gone to a lot of events and met a bunch of people there. But what is support? What is the support structure?
So I am very happy with the people that I have around me today because I think support is very important, especially when you're an entrepreneur because you work by yourself a lot and you feel like it's a very lonely journey for most of the time, right? So I have so the Accelerator Center is a great tool, not just with the mentors, which are great people in the market, but also the other founders that allows like the conversation with other founders allows us to connect and maybe collaborate with other projects. A lot is a great one. I have a lot of different talks and communications with other female entrepreneurs and other entrepreneurs in tech where we can share some. So I'll have another person call me and say like, "Hey, did you like manage any like board meetings? Like, are you choosing any people for your board meetings, or can you help me choose that, or something like that?" Right? So there's a lot of support in that sense.
But just to keep continuing from what you're talking about, the support structure you're talking about, I think is so important for entrepreneurs to feel like there's the space around you and there's people you can work through. I think we misidentify a lot that entrepreneurship is a lonely task, a lonely endeavor. Always talks about these self-made people, but when you're dealing with hard tasks, it's who you surround yourself with, who you feed energies off of, but also ideas and concepts, who you bounce the ideas off of. That really comes back to grow us and feed us, right? So, how does like are you working with any mentors in this space? Have you got any investors in yet? You have a board. How did that piece look
Yeah,
like?
so basically right now we have our mentors through the Accelerator Center. They work very closely with me. I have a couple mentors outside, like Peter Elkings and Previn, which are like great mentors, and they are kind of like the people that I bounce back ideas or that I call like, hey, do you think this is like more like an informal mentorship in that sense? And then in the meanings of investors, we don't have right now uh, for a strategic position from the company. We are choosing the thing is we are funding the company in Canada with our with the money that we brought from Brazil and starting the company like that. I'm in conversation with some investors, but there's a very specific kind of investment that I'm looking for. So we are just waiting and kind of like waiting for the company to get going here before looking effectively for investors.
Yeah. What might be a sensitive topic here, and you can let me know. But what does it look like when you start a business in Canada coming from Brazil? Are you allowed to reincorporate? Are you incorporating here? How does that work? Being like with coming here with a visa or coming here with
Yeah, so like we are now on what they call the startup visa program. The startup visa program, you apply with accelerated. I'm not immigration consultant, so I'll just give a brief
yeah.
review of what I know. But you apply with Accelerator Center, and then there's like this is specific Accelerator Centers that can do that analysis and see if you're prone, like if you're eligible for the startup visa program. And then once you pass, they give you a letter, and then you can apply for residency with that, right? With the for permanent residency. Until you reach that point, there's a couple of things. So you can get a work visa through the startup visa until you get the residency, because the residency takes around 2 years to like follow through. Or there's people that are with different kinds of visas here to study or different other kinds of visa that they're using while they do that process. Within incorporation, as far as I know, British Columbia is the only province that allows companies with non-Canadian founding members to incorporate. You cannot incorporate federally, and I think New Brunswick might be one too, but I'm pretty sure about British Columbia. We're incorporated in British Columbia, and we want to incorporate federally once we are allowed to.
Yeah. So I'm glad you broached that because I was under that impression as well. Like, Canada has this weird system where 20%, if you want to incorporate here, at least 20% of the company must be owned by a resident. So it's
Yeah,
good to know British Columbia is forward thinking like that, allowing for more entrepreneurs to come settle here and get started. That's cool.
yeah.
That's really cool. Okay, so looking at that, how's Vancouver? Right, you're in Vancouver, BC, right?
Well, I'm in Victoria actually, so I'm in Vancouver
Victoria.
Island.
Okay.
Yeah, more specifically down like 40 minutes away from Victoria, so I can't complain. I live on an island, basically in a valley surrounded by mountains, so life here is pretty great. Of course, COVID has its impacts overall in everyone's lives, but it's really not. Yeah, I'm very lucky to be where I am right now.
No, definitely. I think that's also the closest part of Canada to Brazil, I guess we have. So,
Yeah,
kudos.
not nearly, but yeah, close
Not.
enough. Close enough.
No, I appreciate that. Um,
Yeah.
so okay, cool. So now you're established in BC and you're moving along. What does the future holds for you? What are some goals?
So our next goals would be developing our contacts and networking in Canada and expanding to the US. We are in a process to expand to other countries of Latin America as well, and then we want to tackle the EU after 10. There's a couple, so like a 5-year plan there to enter all those markets.
Yeah. Um, there's a really interesting company that came on again also from it's a Mexican company that transferred to Canada, and the entrepreneur there, entrepreneur on our show, really said something really the founder really said something really interesting. It's like a lot of Latin companies are coming to Canada, not just necessarily for the support structures or anything like that, but to kind of like to feed off the activities happening here, but by building for the standards of Canadian like healthcare standards, for instance, or the regulatory, you're kind of allowing like the best strand of regulation to be surfacing back in their home countries. So in Mexico, for instance, they're having a lot of instability when it comes to data privacy laws and agreeing on what that's going to look like. So for companies that establish, to come make to do things at the a North American standard, at least guarantees for the users back home that it's following a certain kind of legalization. And this idea is kind of coming up that as startups and innovators are becoming more global, thinking about where to go to start the companies and work in that. We're like countries are in a global marketplace, competitions for people like you. Right, you could technically take this idea and concept anywhere and build that's favorable to you. Right, there's a lot of factors that go into this. Um, was this a calculated move on your part with Canada, coming and bring this company to Canada? Do you feel like you're following a support structure that exists? Are your friends? Do you have anyone you know that has done this, the same things? What goes behind?
Um,
What's
Yeah,
behind the scenes?
I met people that have done the same thing after I started the process, so that wasn't a part of it. I'm thankful for meeting them now, though. This is a very good support system. But for us, I think it was mostly focusing on our globalization, more like less than wanting to come back to our home country. We are still selling more there, but actually focusing on bringing more business with other countries. So with Canada having access, it makes it easier for me to sell in the US and also makes me
Mm,
easier for me to sell in Mexico. And then with other treaties that Canada has, it makes it easier for me to from Canada is start negotiations with other countries in other markets, which also can happen in Brazil, but it's not as easy. So it was a strategic move in the sense of like globalization and where to start with.
yeah, because stories like yours is so cool because we're so used to in Canada hearing about Canada being an exporter of talent, right? Like people come here with their with ideas, develop it, but then leave, and then
Hmm.
they go an IPO in the U.S. The companies kind of end up going somewhere else to grow. But Canada is a real place to great incubate companies, right? So it's really cool to see people like yourself coming to Canada to get established and get up and going. So speaking of that, like this global marketplace now, um, how is it like when you like talk to other friends, other entrepreneurs? I'm sure like especially working out at AC Center, working out of incubators, accelerators, your networks become like very entwined with others in the innovator community. You talk to others who start this thing. What are your thoughts on Canada's innovation community? Is there a difference between Brazil's and Canada's?
I would say I wasn't a very like the innovation community back in Brazil, to be honest with you, wasn't a very present, didn't have a lot of presence in my life. I wasn't very connected there
Mm,
through that. I think because what happened with us was that we grew fast And then we had a different perspective where like the accelerator centers or the communities that we saw in Brazil, they were very like early stage and not really focusing in B2B sales and stuff like that. So it wasn't really what we were looking for. And so it's a little bit hard for me to compare. In terms of community, like community itself, it's very like it is open, and I can only talk about my experience. But in the sense of being able to communicate, to find people, communicate with people, open conversations, start new ventures, or being invited for things and stuff like that. It's a very open ecosystem. It also helps with what we doing everything online right now because since I'm in British Columbia, most of the things happen, like it or not, in Toronto. It helps me a little bit in the sense of like feel more connected to the ecosystem, which I would probably have to travel a couple times a year to Toronto to in order to experience that in normal times, right?
Mm. Yeah. So I mean, what's it, BC is also known to have its own like a innovation community. But do you still feel that Toronto has that draw? That's really interesting.
I don't. I do feel like Toronto has a draw. It might be because of the connections I made and the accelerator centers that I'm in. Like the Latam and the Accelerator Center are Toronto based. Well, one is Waterloo and the other one is Toronto based. So I feel particularly strong about that. We do have innovation communities here, but between having to do online calls with Vancouver or Toronto, for me, it's pretty much the same, besides the time zone. But yes.
Yeah. One of the topics that I love talking to people through the podcast is, people who have a global mindset, and entrepreneurs generally are very global thinkers. Um, Over the next 10 years, we're going to see some spectacular changes, right? We're going to see like almost close to a billion people. Oh, I just got like a little, okay, I'm back. We're going to see about a billion people potentially be displaced in the next 10, 20 years due to climate change. The effects are becoming more and more pronounced. And in Brazil, which is the world's third largest democracy, a lot of this is taking place in ground zero for this, right? The Amazon, most of the Amazon is located in located through Brazil. Brazil's rapidly changing and industrializing. For people who want to go to Brazil and do business there or get involved, what are your thoughts about about Brazil's an environment for entrepreneurship and for growth?
So regarding entrepreneurship and for growth, I think Brazil is a good community and we are seeing a lot of new unicorns coming out of there. And you have a lot of entrepreneurs that I know, for example, that left, spent a couple of years in the Bay Area and then left the Bay Area to come innovate in Brazil. The thing with investments in Brazil, and I think startups in general in Brazil, again, I'm no specialist, but what we hear in the industry is that you have higher risks, but also higher returns. So
Hmm.
the when you do investments there, it's you might get higher returns because of the higher risk, but if things blow, they end up getting higher. So there's a lot of new VCs that are choosing to invest in global companies, in global startups instead of only investing like in Canada or in the US. So I think I see it's a change. I would say that it's a little bit different with Canada in the sense that we have a lot of different communities here, and we do have in Brazil, but speaking Portuguese is very important too.
Hmm.
It's just a lot of people do speak English there, but speaking the local language, like I do the effort to speak the local language here, I think that would be very beneficial for someone that wants to expand to Brazil or getting a co-founder or someone in Brazil that speaks the local language and know the local costumes, right?
Yeah, really cool. Um, Yeah, so I love that. Thanks for that debrief on Brazil. We had a kind of a company that just went during COVID, was flown out uh, to um, to present their solution to the Brazilian government. Um, their news hasn't broke, so we won't talk about it here, but really exciting. Yeah, so we're now in a global environment for entrepreneurship, right? Like everything's kind of going digital. Accelerators and support, like you being part of the Accelerator Center, but being out of BC, everything's more digital now, right? How do you feel about operating this environment, right? Do you foresee yourself having an office, physical space? Do you feel like you're gonna be a distributed team across time zones? How do you plan to operate as you grow, as things go on post pandemic?
So I think it has been a learning experience for most people. Thankfully for me, because I was already working from here and dealing and doing the whole managing of the company in Brazil, I was
Hmm.
set up for success in that sense because I was already working for like a year and a half from home before everything happened, or 2 years basically. But I would say that I can see a lot of changes in the market that people would like to work from home.
Hmm.
And I can see that working in my business because I don't necessarily believe in the 8 hour kind of schedule for working. Not that I'm going to make anyone work 24/7 because I prioritize life and like actual self-care for my employees. But I can see how some people might want to change places or live in other like more affordable cities and stuff like that. And as long as you can see that they are productive, and let's not lie to ourselves. If we have less office space, the company also spends less. I don't think that is a necessarily negative impact. I think there's a lot of people though that still have to get used with working from home, or not necessarily will like to work from home, and that's what we need to watch for. Because I do have employees that ask me to come back to the office because like I can't work from home. Like it doesn't, like I don't feel productive at all. So I think it's a little bit of getting is like it's easy to say that you can put everyone working from home when I have a setup, I have an office inside my house, right? For people
Hmm.
that don't have that luxury or that privilege, it's way harder. They probably say like, no, I would rather go to the office and actually have a different space.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, I mean, working in that context, right, of everything's now global and operating, what is, your growth and support level looking like? Yeah, do you plan on going to other accelerator programs? I think now things are more digital. Like, you can participate things like, in a global context, but also now competing globally, right, against global ideas. What are your thoughts on, on more of a global mindset, like especially since you're coming from like almost two different continents, and now you've seen like the interactability. I feel like more than, entrepreneurs who are more local based, because when you're in Toronto, you're kind of spoiled because everything's kind of around you. You don't get to think that globally, or even cross provincially. Like, everything's kind of happening in Toronto right now, as a fourth largest zone. So I love hearing about people's thoughts about, cool, I can go to, if I'm gonna get like a really good designer, I'm gonna go to Western Europe, right? That's where the
Hmm.
talent lies. If I want to get a really a good back end engineer, right? I'll probably find someone in India, but front end should be in Western Europe. People are thinking in this kind of mindset for like skills and pools from a global audience.
Yeah.
Have you? Yeah.
I think like I like the idea of it, and I see a lot of different entrepreneurs using that. In my case, I have some reservations, especially because I don't think the B2B market, and when we work with large companies, they are
Yeah.
adapt to that conversation. One of the procurement questions usually is if you like if everyone works from your office or in your country, or if you have outsourced, right? And it might not necessarily be outsourced, but that's not seen well in the industry, especially like for when we're dealing with documents, you're dealing with very sensitive information. So we always have the care of taking care. Or, for example, that in Brazil, I have to have the data centers, even though my software is cloud, I have to have the data centers for the banks that work with me, first instance located in Brazil because of the law. So there's a lot of intrinsicies that I am careful with because we are dealing with legal documents and permits
Mm.
that I would love, like, I like the idea of it and I would love to use it for my business, but because of the intrinsicies of it, it doesn't really, at least, like, maybe in 5 years, the companies will be more comfortable with it. Right now, it's even hard to make the companies understand that it's okay for them to use a cloud system that is not inside their own hardware,
Mm.
let alone that I have like software engineers everywhere, which I don't. Most like I have now all my software engineers in Brazil.
Yeah. That's a really good point. That's a really good point, right? I mean, going back to this, I think a lot more of our conversations are going back towards data and privacy, data and privacy. What are your thoughts, concerns from your industry point of view on data and privacy? How do we think about it?
I think that we like if you look at Europe and the I keep forgetting the name of the law that they have there, but for data and privacy, they are very strict about that, right? I'm not saying it's
Hmm.
good or bad, but it's very strict. And Brazil just actually incorporated a very similar law regarding that, which, if I'm not mistaken, it's not the same in Canada and the US. The Canada in the US is a little bit more loose in that sense, but I might be wrong. I haven't researched entirely. With data and privacy, I don't get a concern for my business myself, just because, in the sense that I have so many security questions and security requirements that if I were to offer like any kind of data privacy, I wouldn't even pass the procurement process, right? With the companies I work with, like my security has to be so tied down that it doesn't become a question for us, because we're not going to use any of this data without their consent.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? Like to think about this kind of context, because this is one of the mainline things that it's in everyone's head. Where's my data located? How's it being held? And going forward. You mentioned a little bit about Brazil and the conversation there, right? In Canada, like, we have this, like the younger generation is growing up saying like we don't care about our data. We just want to put it up everywhere. It's the older generation, I know that's more concerned about, okay, where things are heading up and ending up. In Brazil, what's the cultural atmosphere look like? Right? Is people concerned about this? What is the atmosphere around data?
It's hard for me to say right now because I haven't lived there in 3 years.
Okay.
Even though like I'm part of the ecosystem, I'm not really culturally integrated, and that's especially the conversations that are happening right now. I would say since the new data law, LGPD, it's called, from like data protection.
Mm.
There's a lot of conversation regarding if that's necessary or not. How is that going to work? So that's still developing. I would say that I don't remember hearing a lot of data issues regarding in a personal level,
Mhm.
but in a company level, yes. Because you have a lot of frauds and a lot of different kinds of things that are exponentially higher in Brazil. Data does become an issue, and security of data does become an issue, right?
Mhm. I mean, so Eduardo is the CEO of CardioTrack. He's the entrepreneur
Oh, I
from
know him.
Mexico. Yeah, he was the one I was talking about from before. He
Hmm.
mentioned this, right? In Mexico and in a lot of Latin countries, data is not your sovereign right? Like it's like
Hmm.
any company can collect it from you. It's their data, but you can request them to give it back to you, right? But in Canada,
Yeah.
you as a person has to let other companies collect your data. So you have to say, yes, it's okay to collect my data, right? And then you, of course, can always tell them not to. So he was like one of the main reasons he came to Canada for CardioTrack to launch. Yeah, there's a lot of talent here, but one of the back end things is like if we build under that atmosphere of like, hey, we're going to respect you as a client and make sure the data is like we tell you what you're collecting and how to be transparent with it, people will appreciate it even in the home markets of Mexico. And like
Yeah.
as the environment changes, they're already like forward thinking, right? And this idea of like borrowing a country's standards to build on top of and exporting those
Hmm.
standards, he brought this up, and I thought that was really interesting to think about, right?
Yeah, I like that idea. I would just like to say that Brazil has very high, like the laws, for example,
Brazil.
for data privacy, if I'm not mistaken, are higher standard
Hmm.
than the ones that we're using in Canada now. So we are very, like if you look at the different statistics, we are one of the most bureaucratic countries in the entire world. So I'll just be a little bit careful in the sense of like I always compare with like saying Latin America, the same as saying North America. Like the markets
Yeah,
in Canada and the US are very different. The
of
same
course.
with like Brazil is very big, and the other countries, like it's very nuanced. Like I see a lot of differences between the market in Brazil and the market in Mexico, for example. So just like I would say that I don't know the legislation that well in Mexico, but I know that the legislation, like procurement process, for example, in Brazil, are very intrinsic.
Yeah. So in Canada, exactly what you said. Like we're used to like basically two markets, Canadian
Hmm.
markets and U.S. markets, right? And if you're lucky, maybe Mexican markets, if depending on the company and depending on how you're accessing it. But being, in Latin America, like especially coming out of Brazil, you have so many different countries around you as part of the Latin zone, right? Is there intricacies or anything that you had to learn to like navigate to selling or working within multiple countries, or have you worked in multiple countries at the same time?
Yeah, there's a lot of differences, and I don't think, like, especially talking about Latin America experience, especially, I don't think people will really notice them, but that we are like very distinct. It's not like the European Union that they have like a lot of the same laws and a lot of things that are very similar. Different from Latin America. In Latin America, we have a lot of intricacies from working within cultures to the
Mm,
point where like I speak Spanish and I'm fluent in Spanish, but I do change my accent depending who I'm talking to if it's a business meeting. Because I know if I'm talking from someone from Mexico, I know that if I do an accent that is a little bit closer to them, that's not going to sound as odd. While if I'm talking to someone from Chile or from Argentina, I do those tweaks and just match the person, right? So like those cultural aspects, they don't seem relevant, but the way that people do business can change a lot. We're talking
mm,
about B2B, and a lot of people say it's a rational decision, but you're still dealing with people, right? So if
yeah.
you give them the time to actually speak their local language and not pretend like that, just assume that they speak either Portuguese or English, that will open the market. So there's a lot. I would say that a lot of the cultural differences also play a factor in negotiations.
Wow, that's really interesting to think about. Because it's not something we think about much in North America because you're talking one dialect mostly, right? Some of us in Canada can speak two because of French, right? And God bless them. That's amazing. For me, like even me, like I struggle with my with English, let alone my mother tongue, and then having to deal with other accents and things like that. One of the powers that America has is like it's basically like 50 countries, but all working under one regulatory banner. So it makes it easy to access, right? All these different zones and areas. And the European Union is trying to replicate the same thing with this union, right? Trying to make a one set of rules so that everyone can transact better, but also outside companies come in and operate under one set of rules to get around this. Do you feel like these intricacies are a superpower for you because it's not something that other people can replicate easily because you had to learn this and get this, or is it something that you would like to see more stability, like more of like a level playing ground? It would be easier for business to happen. What are your thoughts about Latin America future?
I would say that I would like to see more. I would like to see more like level playing field for business to be able to negotiate with Latin American companies and Latin America startups for that matter, as well
Mm,
as for Latin American companies to be able to negotiate with other markets, right? So I would like to see that it's not usually something that people pay attention to culturally, like the intricacies of culture, but it's something that is very important. So it would be nice if people like. I would like to see more people thinking about that when they're choosing to look at other markets in order to make better negotiations for sure.
yeah, super interesting. Cool. All right, so just to wrap up, we're getting close to the hour here. Um, this has been really interesting. I really love the aspect that you're like a international entrepreneur, and you kind of brought this new kind of mystique to entrepreneurship. Being able to jump around and operate in multiple countries. That's a really cool skill to have. And Ingrid, thank you for your insights and thank you being so open here. Looking forward to seeing more of what comes out of the companies you develop and ultra running. What are you looking forward to? We'll close this. What are you looking forward to in the post-pandemic world when we're all vaccinated and things are opened up? What are you looking forward to the most?
I'm looking forward to doing my business trips again and actually going to see people back in Brazil, to go to Toronto and to go back on my feet in the sense of like I do work from home, but like being able to go to markets and do in-person meetings because I think that's an aspect that everyone is missing at this moment.
Perfect. Absolutely. I think we're all looking forward to that. So, Ingrid, thank you so much for coming on. We'll end this here. Stick around for a few minutes. We'll do a quick debrief. And for everyone who came in and listened in, thank you so much.